I'm going to assume this is more or less everyone, because it's a lot of people. So, morning. Thanks for coming in, even though the weather's absolutely atrocious. My name's Adrian, as you catch yesterday, and I will be one of your lecturers for the MHIT603 course. It was originally called Prototyping Interactive Technology. Now it's really just prototyping. But yeah, we sort of cover a range of stuff that I'll go over. If I am quite happy for anyone to get some questions or anything. I always find it easier if it's a bit more of a discussion rather than me just sitting here telling you guys everything. So if you have any questions at any time, just shout out. Yeah, alright. Already a few slides ahead. Alright, so I know Rob sort of touched on this a little bit yesterday, but I've been reorganising and reworking my slides, so these have shuffled back to the front again. So we'll just sort of cover what I guess my expectations is for the what my expectations is for the MHIT degree, what I'm trying to get across to you guys and everything. So obviously the MHIT degree is Master of Human Interface Technology, and again the terminology has changed and sort of exact process that we use has changed a few times as processes evolve and change and what's popular becomes a fashion, what's not. But we're calling it at the moment user experience design. Those are just words really, but you know, I think they're the most relevant at the moment because one thing we're really interested in at the HIT Lab is the user experience, above and beyond anything else. So the technology we use is great, you know, it's really high-tech, sci-fi, and it's quite exciting, but if we're not creating good user experiences, then we sort of miss the point of the human interface part of human interface technology. So we're really trying to create great experiences for the users. So we cover that through lectures that you'll be having, obviously the ones with Christoph on a Monday, Wednesday, and then we have the ones on Tuesday, Thursday as part of this course. There'll be assignments. Christoph and I have different thoughts on the amount and level of assignments that you guys will be doing. I'm kind of lazy, so I'd rather have fewer larger assignments so I have less marking, particularly in group size. But there will be a few assignments, and I usually sort of try and get them around the sort of core areas that we'll be covering. So there'll be one on low fidelity prototyping, one on software prototyping, one on hardware prototyping. There's also group project work. So Rob mentioned that yesterday, that there will be there's 2 project weeks, and we've still quite got to nail down exactly what your project will be for this year. But typically the way it works is you have a 1 week project week about halfway through, and we'll put you guys into groups, or you can choose your own groups, in TBD. And during that week, you'll sort of do a 1 iteration through. And these projects, they fall under the MHIT 603 thing, but really they encompass all aspects, so 602 and 603. So typically we'll present you guys with an abstract problem. So Rob used the example of one of the previous groups did the Antarctic Centre. So basically, the Antarctic Centre was purchased by a new group and they wanted to revive it because a lot of the experiences were quite old. So what they did is the groups went out to the Antarctic Centre, they looked at all the stuff that were there, they talked to a lot of people, tried to sort of figure out what it was they were trying to achieve, then came back, did some brainstorming, did some prototyping, and then went out and evaluated that with the client. So we sort of had this one full iteration from requirements gathering, through brainstorming, through prototyping, through evaluation. And then when they came back from that, you know, that sort of narrowed down their ideas a little bit. And then when they had the 3-week project period, they basically then took that idea and did a couple more passes over it. So they went out, talked to the people, showed them what they'd done, sort of asked, you know, is this in the right direction? Is this what you're interested in? And then tried to refine their design. So we're very much try and teach a very iterative sort of method of managing projects because we feel that works better than just sort of getting requirements, doing a project and delivering it and then running the risk of delivering the wrong project. We'll talk about this all a lot more, but yeah, there will be project work anyway. And then down here, I've set applied thesis projects with industry, and obviously that depends. Well, a lot of you guys are not doing the MHIT thesis because you're from MechEng, if I understand, which is fine. For the others of you who are doing MHIT, there'll be a thesis project after the lectures are finished. And so traditionally we've tried to partner students with industry. but that is if you come in, you have a great idea for what you want to do for a project, you can work on your own project. If you partner with industry, obviously it's sometimes it has its own benefits and challenges, so it's good to have someone else to work with to sort of help guide the research, but it does also give you less flexibility because obviously they have their own interests and you have your own that. So what I'm hoping that you guys will learn as part of this is basically how to develop better user experiences. This is specifically for the prototyping part. Obviously, Christoph with the design and evaluation is looking at designing these and evaluating them as well. What I really want to do is just in that middle part help you guys build the best possible user experience as you can. So we're going to look at some practical tools for design prototyping. So that includes low fidelity, so how we can do stuff on paper and stuff to really early on brainstorm as quickly as we can. Leaning to more high fidelity, so how do we write software prototypes, how do we build electronics, how do we fabricate stuff. How to work with project teams, so hopefully you guys have all worked in groups before, but if not, you're in for a treat. How to conduct original research, that more comes into sort of the thesis component of it, so as part of your thesis, you will be essentially conducting some original research. So the whole purpose of a academic thesis is that you're doing something that nobody in the world has ever done before and trying to prove or disprove a hypothesis as part of that. And that's what sort of will be covered more in the Friday lectures and the more how the thesis works. And optionally working with industry depending on who the project ends up. So the project most likely will be with an industrial partner. So previously we've had Science Alive, we've had the Antarctic Centre, we've had Christchurch Airport with your autonomous vehicles and all that sort of stuff. And I'm sure it'll be something like similar again this year with the thesis as well. You may end up working with industry, or you may not, depending on what the thesis is. But you've got a few months to figure that out, so don't stress about that at this point in time. All right, so this is sort of the rough overview of how the lecture is going to go for this part of the course. So for the next probably week and a half, we'll be looking at low fidelity prototyping. So we're going to start today with an introduction to prototyping, and we're going to move on to things like personas, sketching, all these sorts of things that you can do really quickly and dirty because we sort of, there's a programming concept called agile programming, and the idea is you want to fail. One of the core tenets of it is fail fast, fail early, and that's really what low fidelity prototyping is. You want to basically get all your ideas out there as quickly as possible so that you can throw away anything bad early rather than sort of going down the wrong path for a long time. So low fidelity prototyping is about getting as much out there as you can, and then from there we are going to try and sort of pick what's best, refine that, and move on. Then we go into software prototyping. So we're going to look at two programming environments, languages, whatever you want to describe, however you want to describe them. Processing, which is a sort of programming language / environment / community / everything, which is basically around, well, they call themselves programming for artists, which is quite nice if we're really looking at prototyping user experience. We're not too bothered getting down into the nuts and bolts of, all sorts of weird language, programming language stuff. We really want to develop something cool, quick, fun, fast, and processing is really good at doing that. Then we're going to move on from there to Unity. So Unity is a professional game development environment, but it is sort of grown so much more than just for developing games. It has a few training stuff we'll talk about later, and looking specifically at graphics and multimedia, because they tend to be the two things which are sort of most important for user experiences. So most people aren't really too excited about designing databases. Databases do a job, they do it really well, but they're not particularly sexy or exciting. User experience tends to be a bit more on the other side, so trying to make things better for people, make things more exciting. Then there's some hardware prototyping, so specifically we look at Arduino, and we'll look at some electronics and various input output devices. And finally finishing with a bit of fabrication, so how we can put this all together. So before we move on, I'm going to apologise in advance because I can guarantee I'm going to forget all of your names straight away. But what we'll do to start with, at least so I sort of have a bit of a background, is if you guys can go around, say your name, and just if you have any sort of experience in any of these sort of areas, that would be great. Because if everyone is like awesome software developers, then we can probably spend a little bit of this time on software developing, a little bit more time on hardware. My hope is that no one is an expert on everything and not everyone is an expert on one topic, because otherwise I'm going to have to change the lectures a ton. So, yeah.
Hi, so James, I guess prototyping experience from life in Australia. Software prototyping, I did bachelor's in computing, so
You're probably pretty good on that.
I haven't used it since. I've used it in like 4 years. So.
Alright, will be good revision.
Yeah. Unity, yeah, know how to play with that. That's what we did the role play project in. Hardware prototyping, I know hardware, but I haven't actually built anything with it. I built computers and stuff like that, so networks and so on. Fabrication, paper mache. That's good fun.
Why not? Alright, cool.
Okay. I'm Tom. T-O-N-G.
T-O-N-G.
Yeah.
Cool.
It's pretty hard to say. I knew any of them.
That's all good.
I don't know.
That's good. At least one person will hopefully learn something. Cool.
I'm Danny, and yeah, I've got a very low level in probably all of the areas, and then I teach at UCMA, and also dabble with it locally, and I work with redesign, with CNC, and place patterns and stuff, but nothing beyond that.
No, that's all good.
I have several work experience, like because I work for a company that I have to design a product map. So I think I use Value to draw the interface for the human and machine interface, and some PLC program or just for the manufacturing.
Okay. Cool. So that's sort of on the fabrication, maybe a little bit hardware as well?
Yeah.
Danny. I get experience in automation design for coding and pictures for artists, right? Back in Singapore. Then currently I've been doing a course, engineering course on 3D printing.
Cool. So
Yeah,
lots of fabrication experience. Maybe I'll just let you two speak about the course.
Yeah.
I'm Kristen, and well, I have a bunch of fabrication experience because I used to work in makerspace and did like 3D printing and laser cutting around. But used an Arduino before, but only to work on a specific project was fun. And recently did some processing, learned something processing. Unity I opened a while ago, but I only did like kind of play around with it. Nothing too serious. So yeah, from the software side, definitely quite basic. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Ashwin. No experience in prototyping or fabrication. Zero such.
Okay, I'm Chris, because I was doing as a job of designer, so I do have some experiences in prototyping for web, mobile, and VR stuff. In Unity, Arduino, I picked them up as self-learning, so I tried to make Unity game, very easy one. And Arduino as well, a physical design, I'm not sure what they're referring to, maybe no experience in that.
Cool, that's right. So I'll just put you down as a lot of things.
Aretha, so I used to be a database developer, so I did my degree at Lincoln and it was applied computing, so I did a lot of programming out of that. That was a while ago. Then I did database development, Access, SQL Server. So back end and front end, but very much small scale, sitting with the client, making changes as you go. So no formal project management or physical hardware stuff.
Cool. Apologies for saying database is not sexy. There's always someone.
I'm Natalie. I'm not really experience. But I did do like a human factors paper, like ergonomics and stuff.
Right. I mean, that's sort of,
yeah,
I mean, that's, I guess, probably more in the design, but it is, all these things, probably the hardest part about MHIT is trying to separate them out into sort of various topics because everything sort of affects everything else, and really to be the best, I guess, designer and prototyper, you really want to be an expert in everything. So yeah, it'll definitely help. But yeah, probably got a few other skills to plug in there before.
That's alright.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hi, I'm Safia, and because last year I did a small program in lab, so I do know I do have some experience about the processing the Unity, just sketching, but the hardware part is
So Sophia actually joined us last year and did a special topic paper with me on programming, so I'm fairly familiar with her programming.
Now so I've done a bit of prototyping with building drones and a bit of software by myself.
Great, cool. Well, that's good. It sounds like everyone, well, most people have a little bit of something, but no one has everything, which is good. I'm very much about, we're trying to teach you guys, particularly for the people doing masters, we're trying to basically give you guys the skills that you guys are going to need to complete your masters effectively. So because MHIT Lab in general is a very multidisciplinary thing, the MHIT courses were sort of designed in mind to cover everything, hopefully everything you could possibly need in order to complete your masters, because we've had students come from the more engineering things like computer science, various engineering degrees. We've had students come from the softer sciences, so things like psychology, speech and language therapy, and then we've had students come from as diverse as things like theatre and performing arts and stuff like that. So we don't have a typical student here, and as a result we try and sort of cover as much as possible. If there is a particular part of the course that you come to and you're like, I know all this already, you are welcome to skip those lectures. I don't take attendance. But yeah, that's completely up to you. Don't come complaining if you skip the lecture and you miss something. So I do encourage you to come, but I don't expect people, if you're a software guru with 30 years of experience, then learning the introduction to programming may not be the best use of your time. So yeah, cool. Yes.
Should we consider like already getting some of like getting our data?
So we will provide videos.
Okay.
Yeah. So I guess just to give a bit of context, so I have traditionally taught all aspects of this course. As of a couple of years ago, Niels became a postdoc, and as one of the conditions of his postdoc, he has to teach. So he is originally an engineer. So I gave him hardware prototyping, or at least part of hardware prototyping, so he's taken on over that. We do have a couple of new postdocs who I will try and twist their arms to come in and give a lecture or two. So we have Huidong, who started the start of this year, end of last year, and he's very proficient in Unity, so I might get him to come and do Unity. And we also have Harish, who is basically a god of graphics, so I might get him to come in and take some graphics lectures, but we'll see how available they are and how much I can twist their arms. But at least I'll give you guys a bit of a break from me as well, which is probably by that point in time, the course you'll be grateful for. Right, so there are a couple of textbooks. Again, you don't have to buy these, we will provide them as best we can. Probably the one which is most useful is the programming interactivity book. We have some of them. I don't know where they are. I will do this is more when we get into the software, hardware part. So I will track them down over the next couple of weeks and I will see how many we've got and we'll buy more. If you want to, you can grab the source code for them if you want to start playing early here, or if you're really desperate to get into the stuff. I think I have one or two books at the moment, so feel free to come and grab one or two. Also, I put all the lectures on the Learn website. Usually try and put them on beforehand, but apologise I didn't get to it today, so I'll put it on this afternoon. So I always basically try and stay the lecture, so you can't just grab them all and then decide not to come anymore. So the other one, originally a lot of these slides were taken from Interaction Design, which is a pretty good book talking about human-computer interaction. It's kind of an old book now, so I've gradually tweaked and changed things. I found stuff which hasn't worked. It's still a very good book. I wouldn't say it's necessarily required reading anymore, but if you're really interested in this sort of stuff, we have 3 or 4 copies of that in the lab as well that you're welcome to read through. All right, is there any questions at this point? No? Cool. All right, so we'll push on. So yeah, today we're probably going to just be covering introduction to prototyping, really. Prototyping is one of those funny things where there is really no right or wrong answers. Prototyping is a lot of things, and there's very few things that it isn't. So we'll start with what is a prototype. So a prototype is basically a manifestation of an idea, and that can take any sort of form. Commonly when we think about prototyping, we tend to think about physical form, so you're building something to express an idea. But really what we're trying to do is just get ideas out of our head and into the world. And the main reasons for that, well, we'll talk about the reasons for that soon, but we want to allow people to experience and interact with our ideas. So it's one thing for me to think about something, but if I'm working with a client in particular, it's very important for the client to have the same understanding about the problem that I do, or actually probably it's more important that I have the same understanding about the problem that the client does. Because ultimately what they think they're communicating and what I'm understanding is very seldom going to be one and the same. So yeah, prototypes can take the form of anything physical. So it can be post-it notes, and we've had a few students who really got into the idea of post-it notes. And you'll see, particularly Zoe down the end, you'll notice her entire wall is constantly covered with post-it notes. I assume it still is, although she's getting further on her thesis, and I think she's gradually removing them as she goes. So there was a time both her windows were covered with them. But it's really, post-it notes are good because they're very quick, easy to get ideas out on. You can stick them to anything. You can take them down if you change your mind. You can change stuff. You can draw lines between them, all that sort of stuff to try and basically feel out an idea. Role playing is another good one, which unfortunately I don't feel in user experience is probably used as much as it should be. So one example which comes from in an MHIT class quite a while ago, and I'll often pick on earlier MHIT classes, and I'm sure I'll pick on you guys in a few years' time as well. So they were doing, one of their projects was for Science Day, which is an annual event which is held in conjunction with Christchurch Libraries and Science Live and a whole bunch of other things to try and get kids interested in science. They decided to put together a bunch of robotics demos for the kids. And they spent ages programming the robots that we have. Have you guys seen them? Some of you have, yeah. So we got these pretty cool black beetle robots that you can program all sorts of stuff. And they spent ages programming these robots. And then the first time they actually took them out to work with a bunch of kids, they've done all the interactions via speech recognition. And of course, as anyone who has kids or teaches kids will know, the second something exciting comes along, all the kids will be yelling and screaming, and of course the voice recognition just fell over, and the robots did absolutely nothing. So they just stood there because they couldn't understand anything that any kids were saying. And I sort of said to them, how much did you guys do before you, actually started programming? And they're like, oh, we just sort of sat down, wrote down a few ideas and started. And I'm like, you didn't think maybe to just like go out and meet some kids and just do some theatre sports or something and see what would happen? And they're like, no. Like, you could have built got some few boxes and dressed up like a robot and then seen how it goes. And after, 5 minutes of effort, discovered that voice recognition wasn't going to work. Fortunately, that was for their 1 week project. They did that and they learned their lessons, which is kind of the whole point of the 1 week project. And so then they went back and made sure that they didn't use voice recognition or for anything which did require voice recognition. They had another form of input. So role-playing, I think, and we'll look at some examples of how role-playing can be really helpful later. It's one of those things people don't often think about as a form of prototyping, but can actually be really useful. Anything involving physical spaces. So one of my PhD students at the moment is, unfortunately, his work is confidential, so I can't really go into too much detail about it, but he basically is looking at tracking people in large environments. So his whole thing, he can't actually go to the environments that he needs to track people, so I've sort of said to him, can he go to things like a paintball arena or something like that to sort of try and mimic up these large environments. And that is still a form of prototyping. He's trying to test out what he's doing in an environment which isn't the end environment, but it's very important to the project that he's doing, the environment that's running. It can be physical objects, obviously we'll talk about that later on. It can be software interfaces, web interfaces, storyboards. So we'll go into more detail about all these things later on. But the important part is that there are various levels of refinement. So prototyping is a continuum. We don't sort of say we're going to do paper prototyping and then we're just going to build a finished product. We ideally want to start at the bottom and gradually work our way to a more and more complete product. And along the way, depending on the fidelity of what we're testing, we will be testing different aspects. So when we're doing low fidelity, we're looking at quick and dirty sort of prototyping, get some rough ideas out, see what's good, see what's bad. When we get to the more high fidelity, that's when we're really starting to sort of tweak things. So we're looking at the, if you're building a device, the position of buttons and stuff like that. When you're building a low fidelity prototype, you don't really care if, that's not the most ergonomic position. But when you start building into these more high fidelity, that's when it starts becoming critical. So you're looking at testing different things along that spectrum as well, and we'll talk a bit more about that as we go. So yeah, from low fidelity prototyping, we have things like paper prototyping, sketching, then we sort of start moving into wireframing and video prototyping, Wizard of Oz prototyping, doing semi-functional prototypes and so on. So you notice the use of words prototypes, there'll be other things like sketching and stuff. Depending on what interaction or designer you follow, they'll use different terms. I'm just going to sort of use prototyping as a catch-all for anything we're doing along the process to building the final product. So there is an interaction design which was built off. They were very specific that sketching is not prototyping. I would argue that sketching is a form of prototyping, but again, it depends on whose word you take as gospel as to the definition of what some of the words mean, but really we're all trying to achieve the same goal.
Go Wizard of Oz, what's that?
What's that, sorry?
Wizard of Oz prototype.
Wizard of Oz. Okay, so Wizard of Oz prototyping, we will talk about later, but to give you a brief example, I had a student, PhD student a few years ago, and he was working in AR, natural gesture interfaces. So is everyone familiar with what AR, augmented reality is?
Yep.
Kind of? Okay, so augmented reality, so hopefully everyone knows what virtual reality is. You strap a pair of goggles on and, the world gets replaced, and so you're in a virtual world. Augmented reality, so there's what's known as Milgram's continuum, which basically says that if you have reality that we're all living in, hopefully, at one end of the spectrum you have virtual reality at the other end of the spectrum, so one is the real world that we experience, and the other one is a completely digital world. Augmented reality sits in the middle. So we are still within the real world, but we have digital elements added to it. So that can be things like wearing a Google Glass or the Microsoft HoloLens, where you wear a device over your head, which you can see through, so you can still see the real world, but it can composite digital artifacts in. So you'd look at this, you'd wear the headset, you'd look at the table, I can see all of you, but in the table there would be some digital aspect. A good example, if you've ever seen the Kingsman movies, some people have here. So in Kingsman, they have board meetings, but they're all scattered all around the world, so everyone comes and sits down at a table, puts on a set of glasses, and they see holograms of all the other people sitting around the table as if they're really there. So that's a really good example of augmented reality. But it can go, arguably, any movie which has been made by Hollywood in the last 20 years could be categorized as augmented reality. So King Kong, Lord of the Rings, none of those characters were real, they filmed real locations, and then they composited digital characters in it. So arguably that's still augmented reality as well. But to answer your question, Wizard of Oz, so yeah, one of my students was working on natural hand interaction in augmented reality. So it's one thing to be able to see something, but if you can't interact with it, you're sort of missing a lot of the experience. So he wanted people to be able to reach out and interact with these things that you can't actually touch or feel because they're not there. So before he started building this thing and trying to figure out, all these bits and pieces that he would need to program in order to make it work, what he did is he basically built an augmented reality headset which just displayed something, and then he had someone sitting on the other side of the room with a bunch of cameras so they could watch the person, and he would say sort of stuff like, okay, how would you enlarge this object? And they'd say, okay, well, I'd reach out and grab it, a pinch zoom like you would on a tablet or whatever, reach out and grab it, stretch it like that. And he had someone sitting behind or in another room with a bunch of cameras, and when they did that interaction, they would manually scale up and scale down the object. So for all these people who were using it, as far as they were aware, they were using this super amazing system which was able to, they could issue voice commands that say, make it 10% bigger, and make 10% bigger, and they'd say, stretch it like this, or I would change the scale with my hand like that. Anything these people could throw at, the system would react to, and they're like, oh, this is absolutely amazing. But really it was just a guy in another room with a bunch of cameras who was like pushing buttons. So from the Wizard of Oz movie, you know, you have the giant floating head, but really it's all controlled by a little man with pulling some levers behind the curtain. And that's where the analogy comes from. You're basically faking how a system works by having a person play the role of the machine. Another example, which is slightly lower fidelity, we had a PhD student here, and she was working in interactive educational games. She wanted to design the user interface, and so basically what she did, she printed out everything on paper, all the user interface elements, and she would say to people, you know, okay, your first job is to open your inventory. And people would look at it and they'll be like, oh, okay, I'll tap on that. And then she would shift all the user interface elements on and put all the new ones in there. So before she'd ever written a line of script or a line of code or, you know, done any UI design or anything, she just printed out a bunch of stuff on paper and recorded people interacting with it on paper, and then she would shuffle around acting as the user interface. And so for her, that was really good because she was able to very quickly prototype out, well, this is what works, this is what doesn't. If she sort of said to someone, you know, open your inventory, and they're like, I don't know what the inventory is, immediately it becomes obvious that she has a problem with the design, so she needs to work on this. Alright, so why prototype? What's the point of all this? There are, as far as I'm concerned, 5 main reasons. We're going to go into a bit more detail on all of these actually, but we have empathy gaining, so trying to get an understanding of the problem, of our users, of the design space in total. We prototype to explore, so sometimes you think, oh, something's really a great idea. When you actually go to build it, you find out it doesn't work for various reasons that you haven't even considered. To help us make decisions, if we're working in a group and I have a great idea and someone else has a great idea and we're both arguing over it, sometimes the easiest way to resolve that is just to actually build the prototypes and then compare, and it will hopefully at that point become obvious, actually yours is better than mine, let's go in your direction. Inspiration. So inspirations are both inspiring people to, you know, follow what you're trying to convey, but it's also for your clients. So if you are working on something, there is nothing more deflating than spending ages building something for a client when you show it to them, they're not impressed. So being able to inspire them and get them involved in that process early on will very much help you manage the user expectations and the end result of that product as well. And finally, testing is obviously a big one as well, so making sure that what we're working on is the right idea. So empathy gaining. Why is it important and useful? Interviews and observations may not paint the whole picture. People don't know what they don't know, is basically the biggest thing. So you go and you sort of ask someone to explain something to you, and they will explain it, their understanding of what it is. But it may be that, you know, they've been working with this piece of software or this hardware for decades now, and they actually don't know that it's terrible. They don't know that it can be any better. And so what you end up doing is a slightly better version of a terrible piece of software or anything, because you've just talked to this person, they're like, oh, you know, I do this and that, and when I click on this button, it takes 10 seconds to load the next screen. So you build exactly the same system, but it takes 5 seconds to load the next screen. You're like, yeah, I've succeeded, but then if you'd have just thrown the whole thing out and started from scratch, you might have actually ended up with a better solution anyway. So it's yeah, so it's important sometimes because what you are told may not actually be the whole truth. Walking a mile in users' shoes is a good one. So I've thrown this picture up here of this woman who's in hospital, and she's actually an engineer, she's not a patient. But they were building this new health monitoring system, so you can see she's got all these devices and stuff hooked up with it. And from an engineering standpoint, this is a pretty impressive machine. It's got all these sensors built into this one thing, one cable which runs out and plugs into a system and gives you all your patient's vitals. And from a technical standpoint, yeah, really impressive. Until they decided to actually go out and prototype it. And she found it incredibly impersonal, lying on a bed while you've got this box sitting in your lap with wires running all over you, and all people are like reaching over you to strap stuff in. I don't know if anyone's spent any significant time in hospital, but it's a pretty embarrassing and awkward and shameful experience in a lot of ways. I was lucky enough to have surgery last year, and it's not pleasant. So even something like this, having to have this box sitting in your lap while they plug it in, it just dehumanizes you. It makes you feel like you're actually not a person, you're just a problem that needs solving. They would have never realized this. They were looking at it from a purely technical thing. And from that, it was a pretty easy solution that actually they need to design this so that it straps to the bottom of the bed and all the cables run along the side, so that rather than leaning over the person to grab stuff, you can actually go to one side and connect them and walk around the other side of the bed and connect them. And it just gives the person a much better user experience. A very simple modification to the design suddenly creates a much better user experience for the users. And yeah, the whole idea is we want active empathy. We don't want to be an outside observer. We're not sitting in our ivory towers looking at these people who we're solving problems for. We're actually working in amongst them. We are suffering as they're suffering, so that when we build our prototype, to ease our own suffering, it will hopefully ease their suffering as well. So empathy gaining is best used when we have some idea about the problem, but want to further explore an aspect. So, maybe you go in, you do some interviews, you read any documentation or whatever, and then you actually just go in and sit there and watch someone for a while, or you actually sit down and do their job with them, and hopefully, things will start sort of appearing that you're just like, why did you do that? And from seeing these little interactions and stuff, you can start getting a better understanding of things. Helps you think about what you want to learn more about as well. If you see someone do something you don't understand, why did they do it that way? Is that the way they're supposed to do it? Is that the way they've learned to do it? Because they've been working around some other latent problem that isn't immediately obvious. And brainstorming ways to investigate the subject as well. Exploration is one of the other ones. Exploration building things. So as I mentioned, there's numerous times that I've had ideas for things that I think are quite great, and when you actually put them out, you realise that for whatever reason they're not going to work. And that is very good if you can get that out of the way nice and early, so you don't spend ages and ages working on this. I guess on the other side, solutions may only present themselves when you have all the pieces in front of you. So in addition to trying to weed out the bad ideas, it might be that only once you've got all the stuff in front of you, you can actually start to see how the various pieces are going to fit together. And there's a good example of this from the Apollo 13 space mission. So if any of you have seen the Apollo 13 movie with Tom Hanks from a long time ago now, they sort of talk about this quite well. But basically what happened is they had an issue on the rocket that was going to the moon. And yeah, I'll just read this quote. "We would have died of the exhaust from our own lungs if mission control had come up with marvelous fix. The trouble was the square lithium hydroxide canisters from the command module would not fit the round openings of those in the lunar module environment system. After a day and a half in the lunar module, a warning light showed us that the carbon dioxide had built up to a dangerous level, but the ground was ready. They had thought of a way to attach the command module canister to the lunar module system by using plastic bags, cardboards and tape, all materials we had on board. Jack and I put it together just like building a model airplane. The contraption wasn't very handsome, but it worked. It was a great improvisation, a fine piece of cooperation between ground and space." So basically what happened, there was two parts of the rocket. There was the part which was basically orbiting the moon, and there was the lunar module which came down and landed on the moon and then bounced back up, connected to the other part, and they all came back. This seems like a terrible design to begin with, but the parts of the lunar module, which was basically responsible for removing carbon dioxide from the air so they didn't all suffocate on their own exhalations, was square in one part and round in the other part. So they weren't actually interchangeable. So, they sort of discovered this was a problem when they're already orbiting the moon. So it's not like they can pop down to Bunnings Warehouse and buy a few bits of tubing and stuff to make it. So what they actually did, the guys at Mission Control had a complete manifest of everything that was available on the spacecraft. So they just got everything and dumped it on a table, and they basically had to connect. It's almost too good to be true. They had to figure out how to fit the square peg in the round hole. And so they basically just stuck everything on the desk, and they spent like kind of not even sure how long it was, like a better part of the day, I think, trying to figure out how they could take all the bits and pieces they had and connect them together to fit this carbon dioxide scrubber from a square thing to a round thing. And I did actually originally have the video clip off the movie, but it was quite long. But that's a perfect example of when sometimes the solution isn't apparent until you have all the pieces in front of you. So that's the prototyping to explore. They had everything there, only then were they able to find the fix. Whereas if they've just been poring over manuals, there was a good chance that everyone on the spacecraft would have died before they figured out what they were doing. So prototyping for decision making. Sometimes it's unclear how to proceed forward. There's a good chance you guys will figure this out in your group meetings, that you end up with two people with ideas that they both want to pursue, and ultimately it comes down to somebody's going to make the decision. And often the easiest way to do that is just have both people very quickly, roughly prototype their ideas so everyone can get an idea of what's going on in their head. Because part of the reason we get so invested in ideas as well is because we can't communicate our ideas. So I have this great thing and I'm trying to explain it to you guys, but you don't really get it. And so you're like, well, it doesn't actually sound that great. But I know in my head that it is. So I can, you know, if I can prototype it out, hopefully either I can convince you guys that it is great or I can actually realize that no, it actually is a terrible idea. So we need to move on. So building a prototype allows articulation of thoughts to the group. Evaluating prototypes may help reach a consensus without compromise. So it may be in the end that if I've got a great idea and you've got a great idea, maybe we can actually somehow smash those two ideas together and take these parts of both. And this is a common thing as well, which is sort of, this is taken from, it was later on in the slides, but I feel it is kind of relevant here as well. So this is typically what we think about when we're thinking about prototyping, iterating a design. So we come up with some idea, and it's, if you think of a perfect idea or the perfect prototype being at the top of this hill, we start somewhere hopefully nearby, but not quite at the top, and then as time goes on, we refine it, and we get better and better, and eventually we reach the top of the hill. We've got the perfect prototype and perfect product. What happens in reality is it tends to be much more like this. So there may be several different solutions. Some are going to be better than others, and there's a good chance the very first idea we land at may not actually be the best one. And this is often where group work comes in handy, because if everyone ends up with a different idea, which is at a different, optimal, we can sort of try a few of them and sort of see which one seems to be most promising, in the hope that we're not just going to get the best solution or the best optimization of a bad solution. We can actually find the best solution, and then we can iterate over that. So as far as decision making, and this is true for everything, stay as low resolution as possible for as long as possible. You want to try and iterate out all those problems before you spend days, weeks, months working on something. If you can draw something on a piece of paper and throw it out in 5 seconds, that could be saving you days or weeks of work down the line. Develop models of potential candidates, distill down to the most important variable. So if we're trying to solve one problem and I have this great idea which is going to solve X element, and someone else has got a great idea which is also going to solve X element, don't worry about anything else. Don't worry about how pretty it looks or what sort of user interface it is if we're trying to solve some mechanical problem. Just focus on what actually is the important aspect between the two of these and really develop around that. And yeah, it never hurts to get fresh, in addition to your team, get a fresh set of eyes reading users. The more you can involve users, the better, really, because they know it better than you do. They always will know it better than you do. They work with it day in, day out. You're just coming in for, weeks, months, years to solve this, but they're working with it for their entire lives. So if you can sort of come up with a couple of ideas, hopefully, and actually that's another thing why it's important to stay low resolution. If you show someone something which is sketched down on a piece of paper, they're much more likely to be honest with you and say this is crap, than if you present to them this beautifully polished thing that you've obviously spent a long time working on. They'll be like, yeah, that's really nice, because they don't want to hurt your feelings. But if you just scribble it down, they're most likely to say, actually, no, this isn't what we're looking for. And you haven't spent a lot of time on it, so you can put your fine. Again, this is something which we'll talk about a bit later on. Inspiration, articulating an idea in detail so that others can fully understand is difficult. I'm sure we've probably all had experiences in life where you've tried to explain something to someone and they just don't get it. And you're sitting there going, is this person dense or what? And then it just turns out that oftentimes it's that they have gotten some slight miscommunication about what you're talking about, and they've latched onto that idea. And then you're throwing all these other things at them, but they've already got this mental model of what you were talking about. And so no matter what you're talking about, they're just trying to fit that into what they already understand. And that can be incredibly frustrating when you know that they haven't understood what you're talking about, but you can't get them to just forget about it and start again. Different perspectives of the same idea will uncover different paths. So that's, as I mentioned, one of the whole motivations for teamwork, getting other people involved, is that you can basically ask them, actually, what's your opinion on this? Do you have any ideas? Particularly, and this is one of the reasons we're quite proud of it being multidisciplinary, is that the more eyes we have from different viewpoints, the more likely people are to come up with better solutions. I'm a tech guy. I will see a tech solution to every problem, even if the tech solution is not the right one. And so I quite often, try and go and talk to Christoph or someone who's a bit more on the softer science and sort of say, is there another way around this that I'm not seeing, because I'm just tempted to fire up Xcode and start hammering away at something which I'm going to spend months at, when really the problem is just that the user interface needs a couple of tweaks because people don't understand that this button doesn't do what I think it does. And in my day-to-day job, I'm always looking up stuff that the response from my colleagues is always, that's really great, but it looks awful. And for me, I'm just happy to close my ears to the second half and just get that this is really great, because I know it looks awful. I'm not an artist or anything, so everything I make looks terrible. And hopefully the idea is you can spark a chain reaction as well. Brainstorming, and we talk about this a bit later, brainstorming works best when it's very fluid and dynamic. You should never say no to an idea in brainstorming. We all sit down and throw out every idea, no matter how insane it is, and only after we've completely exhausted all ideas do we start eliminating stuff. Because if I say no to you, you're like, oh, what about if we did this? And I say no. Straight away, you're like, okay, we're going to shut down an entire branch of thinking. But maybe as you're going through these completely insane ideas, you actually come back around to something which is actually quite reasonable. But if I say no, you're just not going to bother pursuing that. So we want to start this chain reaction. We want to generate as many ideas as fast as we can, and we'll worry about throwing them out later on. And the last one of those 5 is testing. So we have an idea we want to articulate. We want to convey our ideas, test the approach, and refine our solution. So it's pointless us building these beautiful prototypes if they don't solve the problem we're trying to solve. And that's where testing comes in. So we build some prototype, and it may just literally be a drawing on a piece of paper that we can take to someone and ask them for some feedback on it. And that is a valid form of testing. It doesn't have to be rigorous statistical testing. It doesn't have to be making sure we have p-values under 0.05 and sample size of over 50. It can literally be me scribbling something on a piece of paper and saying, what do you think of that? And you say it's crap. And I'm like, okay, well that's that idea tested, isn't it? But what the idea is, we want to make sure that we're heading in the right direction at every point in time. And the only way we're going to figure out if we're doing that is test. And ideally test either off a set of requirements or off a user or some sort of external thing. If I'm the one who's drawn it and then my test is, do I like this? Well, of course I'm going to like it because I drew it. But if I have something external that I can test against. And also all these things feed into each other. So testing helps with empathy as well. So if I show a user a test and it's obvious to the user that I haven't actually understood their problem, like they explain something like, okay, yeah, I know what your problem is, I go off and sketch something, I show it to them, it can be a clue to them that the empathization part of the process isn't complete yet. I actually have misunderstood what the problem is. And it may be that they will say, oh, okay, I can see you're focused on that, but actually I think the real problem lies here. And we can probe different aspects. So we never have to test a complete solution. We can test various aspects, and the prototypes that we're building should reflect those aspects that we're trying to test. So if we're trying to test, is this button in a good place? Why bother making the rest of the user interface look nice? Just focus on that one button, because the more effort you put into that prototype, the more likely you are to get a more general critique. Whereas if you just focus on the one thing you want to test, the more likely the critique and the feedback is going to be about that one thing. How to prototype, again, quick low resolution prototypes stops people from getting attached to an idea. So the more time we invest in it, the more hurt we're going to feel if somebody says it's terrible. Low resolution prototypes will elicit more detailed feedback. Users are more likely to like our high resolution prototypes. Bring resolution to the aspects which are important for what you're trying to test. Test in the context that the solution will be used. We'll sort of talk about these first ones, but testing in the context the solution will be used. That's an important one we sort of touched on with the previous master's students and the robots. All the testing prototyping they've done up until that first live test they did had not been in front of children. And they realised that all their work to that point was sort of a waste, because the one thing they had focused on was voice input, and that was the one thing that they couldn't do. So test in the context again as early as you can. If you can go out and test in the environment that your solution is going to be in. Is it in a quiet laboratory environment like this? Is it in a noisy, dusty, hot, bright warehouse? And so just, testing, we want to consider the variables as well. So variables are basically the aspects we want to test in a certain prototype. Focusing saves energy, and results will be more conclusive and nuanced as well, so we talked about that. So this is the cost of not testing. So has anyone heard of the Nokia Engage before?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the Nokia Engage was before the smartphone era, for any of you who don't know, and it was a pretty impressive piece of kit. It was a cell phone, which is also a games console, and did a whole bunch of really impressive things. Great piece of technology. Except it had one fatal flaw. The speaker was here, and the microphone was here. So instead of holding it like you would normally a phone, you held it sideways. And it was an enormous failure, because nobody wants to be seen as the person walking around holding their phone sideways to their ear, because they think you're a complete idiot. And so they built this amazing piece of technology, but because of one tiny little flaw, it was a massive failure. They did end up releasing an update where they had moved the speaker and the microphone to the side of the phone where it should have been to start with, except the damage was already done by that point in time. So in the days before memes were memes, there was a bunch of websites around side talking where people just went around trying to post the most ridiculous photos of themselves, basically mocking Nokia and the Nokia Engage. And that's publicity which is very hard to come back from, particularly on specific products. So we all know Nokia is not doing as well as they used to be. I'm not going to say that was specifically because of the Engage, but certainly for the Engage device, we have a few in the lab somewhere actually, if you want to have a play with them. But certainly the Engage as a device never recovered from side talking. So that's one humorous example. It was probably less humorous when Nokia probably invested millions of dollars designing, building this thing. But it can actually have quite serious consequences as well. So for those of you old enough, back in 2004, I think it was Al Gore was running against George Bush. And George Bush won by the slightest of margins. And there was a massive fuss kicked up around the voting process in particular. But there was one in particular, which was the Palm Beach County ballot. Now, Palm Beach is in Florida, which was one of the swing states, so it was always going to be close between Al Gore and George Bush in the state. And as it turns out, it was sort of everything hinged on which way Florida went. The US voting system is really weird and crazy. Your vote doesn't actually count. Your vote just is supposed to influence someone else's vote who counts. So I vote, and then you have a person who represents, in Texas, I think there's 30 people whose votes actually count, but they're supposed to vote in the way that the people who live in their areas vote. So it'd be like if you voted and then your local congressman voted on your behalf. But that's neither here nor there. But this was the Palm Beach County ballot, which went out. So you can see, looking at it, makes sense. We've got the Republican, George Bush and Dick Cheney. The Democrats got Al Gore and Joe Lieberman, and then we've got a bunch of other parties which don't count because this is America and it's a two-party system. So you'd look at this, and if you didn't take the time to read the ballot, you'd be like, okay, Republicans are the first group, so we'll punch that hole for voting Republican. Democrats are the second group, so we'll punch the second hole for voting Democrat. And just like that, you've thrown your vote away. Because what the second vote actually counts for is the Reform Party. Because for some reason it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, which you can actually see on the numbers, but if you go there, particularly having spent a bit of time in Florida is full of old people who don't have the best eyesight anyway, so to ask them to read these numbers. And what ended up happening is in this, which was one of the counties which voted pro-Republican, which was expected to vote pro-Democrat. There was an estimated 4,000 people voted for the wrong party. So they voted for the Reform Party. So the Reform Party got like a huge upsurge in votes that they were never expecting. And then there was another 19,000 where both the Reform Party and the Democratic Party, the holes were punched. And they just got thrown out and they didn't count as a vote. And I did actually have...
But they have different cards than the rest of the country.
Yeah, so I think different states and even different counties have different voting things. And it's still true today where they have different machines and all sorts of stuff. It's, the whole US election thing is kind of ridiculous. But yeah, in the end, Bush won by 537 votes in Florida. Like he won the state by 500. So even if you just count the 4,000 people who voted, that they voted for the wrong one, let alone the 19,000 who were confirmed made a mistake because they punched two holes, Al Gore would have been the president rather than George Bush. Maybe the war in Iraq wouldn't have happened. You know, pretty sizable reaching because they never actually sat down with a bunch of people and asked them to vote or punch holes and say who are you voting for. And yeah, that caused massive recounts, and the whole thing was just a massive disaster. So there can be quite far-reaching implications of not doing prototyping and testing.
Well, maybe they didn't want to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a conspiracy.
Yeah. So maybe the Russians designed that,
Yeah.
that ballot, I don't know. Yeah. All right, so yeah, just to sort of wrap up this part, and then we'll have a quick 5-minute break. So the prototyping goals, we want to learn, we want to solve disagreements and reduce miscommunication, sorry. We want to try and start conversations around various things. As I said earlier, we really want to fail quickly and cheaply. I can't remember what the exact figures were, but there is a lot of sort of infographics which go around which talk about the cost of fixing a bug. And I'm from software, so these are predominantly from software. But it's something like if you fix a bug in the prototyping stage, it will cost you tens and hundreds of dollars. If you have to fix a bug by the time it is out in the public, you're looking at costing hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars, depending on what your software is. If you're talking about, you've only got to look at all these massive things like Heartbleed and these other things where, because of bugs which have been introduced in software, there's been massive security leaks. And we're talking about getting to the tens of millions of dollars of damage that have been caused because somebody forgot to do a check to say, actually, if we ask for 10 characters and the person enters 11, make sure we just chop off everything up to 10. And oftentimes that's as simple as the bug is. They just allow people to keep typing past the end of the memory, and then they can just start pulling out everything after that memory. So yeah, fail cheaply and quickly, and the best way to do that is low resolution testing. And to manage the solution building process as well. So if we can split up the prototype into as many small components as we can test, build, and design each part and then bring them back together as well. Oh, sorry, one last slide. But the other thing to consider about prototyping is that there are compromises as well. So I've sort of been singing the praises of prototyping because that's what this course was, even if I wouldn't be teaching it. But it is important to remember that there are compromises as well. So when you're prototyping something, it's never going to be perfect, otherwise you build a finished product and then you've sort of defeated the whole purpose of prototyping. And it's important that those compromises are understood and communicated as well. So if you're showing it to someone, you're testing it, you've got to take into consideration if you're doing software, things like slow response. If the old system did something in one way and it took 1 second, and the new system does something in a much better way, but because you've used a slower programming language or you haven't optimized it, it takes 5 seconds, it's immediately going to be seen as worse, even though it may be a much better solution. People will always focus on user interface stuff. They will always complain, I don't like the color of that icon. You're like, that's fine, that's not what I'm testing, but they will get fixated on the color of that icon. So again, these things need to be communicated early so that the user or the tester is focusing on the important parts. And limited functionality, so I mentioned, we want to build our prototypes to test one aspect. We need to communicate that. If the person's like, oh, what does this button do? You just don't worry about that button, Let's just focus on this one thing. If that button's going to be a distraction, remove that one button so that they're not sitting there going, oh, what happens if I click on this or whatever. And typically there's two common types of compromise. So there's the horizontal compromise where you provide a wide range of functionality, but it doesn't necessarily all work. So maybe you're prototyping the physical design of something. Maybe a digital camera, you want to design layout where all the buttons are because you're interested in ergonomics or whatever. But maybe none of the buttons actually do anything. So you just have to communicate, oh, this button will do that and that, but you can't actually test it. I just want to see, is this comfortable for you to use? Is this comfortable for people with big hands? Is this comfortable for children? If you're producing things for people who are elderly and they maybe had strokes and have limited mobility, or they have arthritis, or they're disabled or whatever, you need to consider all these things. And then you have vertical compromises, which is the opposite, where you only do one thing, but you really drill down into that as deep as you can, and again, you make sure you communicate that. So the compromises and prototypes mustn't be ignored, not by the user, especially not by you when you're communicating it to the user. All right, well, let's have a 5-minute break there if anyone needs to get a coffee or go to the bathroom or whatever, and we'll start back at 5:11.